As you probably have guessed, bombers are specifically designed to attack naval and ground targets by launching torpedoes or dropping bombs. Heavy bombs need big airplanes, and today we'll show you some of the biggest. The Kalinin K-7 was a heavy experimental aircraft tested and designed in the Soviet Union back in the early 30s and had a rather unusual configuration. It has twin booms and large underwing pods house fixed machine gun turrets and landing gear. Its airframe was welded from chrome molybdenum steel and was originally supposed to have 6 engines in the leading edge. But this saw the project loading weight drastically exceed and the engine arrangement was overhauled. Designed by pilot Konstantin Kalinin at the Aviation Design Bureau, which he headed in Kharkiv, the Kalinin K-7 was one of the biggest aircraft ever built before the jet age. Its wingspan was closer to that of a Boeing B-52 Stratofortress, and as a civil transport vessel, it could have handled 120 passengers and upwards of 15,000 pounds of mail. In military use, it would have had the capacity for 112 fully equipped paratroopers. That's a beefy aircraft. Its first flight was in 1933, a mere 3 decades after the Wright brothers debuted the world's first flying machine. But it wouldn't be in this video if it wasn't also used as a bomber. Although the fact it featured guns as well meant it was curiously both a bomber and a gunship, not a common combination. Even by today's standards, the Kalinin K-7 is a big airplane, with the wingspan of 173 feet. By contrast, the popular U.S. heavy bomber Martin B-10, the prominent bomber of the time, had a wingspan of just 68 feet. But just because it was big, don't be fooled into thinking it was perfect. During its maiden flight, the Kalinin K-7 showcased concerning instability, the construction of the airframe resonating with the frequency of the engine. This physical phenomenon meant the airframe will oscillate because of the engine's vibrations. At the time, little was known about this very specific issue, so in an attempt to address it, the tail booms were shortened and strengthened. Despite this, the Kalinin K-7 still suffered from significant vibrations, and on its 11th flight, there was a structural failure at the tail boom, causing the elevator to jam and leading to a deadly crash with 14 men aboard. Seeing as we mentioned the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress, we will talk about that next. This American long-range subsonic jet-powered strategic bomber has been operated by the U.S. Air Force since the 1950s and is capable of carrying up to 70,000 pounds of weapons and has a combat range of more than 8,800 miles with the ability for aerial refueling. With a 185-foot wingspan as tall as the Leaning Tower of Pisa, the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress is a commanding behemoth of the skies. They first became operational in 1955 at Castle Air Force Base in California, and since then have played an integral role in every military altercation to feature America from the Cold War to Vietnam to global war on terror. They are to warfare what Nick Fury is to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and they don't look to be winding down anytime soon, with the Air Force recently deciding to extend the B-52's life right through into the 2040s. That will be 90 years of solid, reliable service. Powered by 8 Pratt & Whitney turbofan jet engines, the Stratofortress is an absolute powerhouse of a machine, and the youngest still in service are a creaky 57 years old, yet still going strong. When you consider that almost 40% of men and women serving in the Air Force are less than 26 years of age, it is crazy to think these giant planes are turning in a longer commitment than the men and women who board them. They've even become stars of cinema, with the B-52 being prominently featured in Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, among many other appearances on the big screen. When they first entered into service, the Strategic Air Command planned to use them as a way of deterring and counteracting the Soviet Union's vast and swiftly modernizing military. Throughout the Cold War, B-52s performed alert patrols, loitering at high altitudes near Soviet Union borders, able to offer a rapid first-strike capability in case of a nuclear war. But after the last 1950s saw the new threat of possible surface-to-air missiles, the intended use of B-52 was altered so that it now served as a low-level penetration bomber during foreseen attacks upon the Soviet Union. In fact, every time a new war or threat has reared its ugly head, America has always found a use for its reliable old B-52s. When it comes to everything from war to space travel, the United States and Russia seem to have something of a rivalry. always trying to one-up each other. So, if one of the biggest bombers in history is American, of course another of them is Russian. The Tupolev Tu-160 is a supersonic variable sweep-wing heavy strategic bomber that was originally designed by the Tupolev Design Bureau. It is also the heaviest and largest combat aircraft with a variable sweep-wing design to ever hit the skies. Entering service in 1987, these colossal things are the last strategic bomber to have been designed for the Soviet Union. Since the early 2000s, major modernization efforts have been underway, with each and every Tu-160 undergoing significant updates to their electronic systems. The Tu-60 uses a fly-by-wire control system with a blended wing profile as well as full-span slats that are used on the leading edges. The craft is powered by 4 Kuznetsov NK32 afterburning turbofan engines, the most powerful to ever be fitted to a combat aircraft. It feels like the designer was overcompensating for something. In 2015, these bombers, nicknamed Blackjacks and White Swans among different circles, finally made their combat debut when the Russian Air Force struck Daesh targets across Syria. This is a long time after its first ever test flight, which dates back to 1981, and a rather long time since design began way back in the early 70s. Russia must be happy with its performance in 2015 because they have confirmed they plan to restart the production of these massive bombers in 2023, churning out as many as 50 brand spanking new Tu-160s titled the Tu-160M2. These slightly reworked models will have an almost identical airframe to the classic design, though the mission systems, engines, and avionics will be completely revamped for the modern age. Where these designs differ from their American counterparts is that while American bombers are all about stealth, Tu-160s prioritize speed and are armed with long-range cruise missiles. While an American bomber sneaks up unseen to attack their targets, the Russian design offers the ability to strike fast and hit hard before the enemy has any idea what the heck is going on. The North American Aviation XB-70 Valkyrie, named for the Norse warrior ladies, was a prototype of the United States Air Force Strategic Air Command's planned B-7 nuclear-armed deep-penetration strategic bomber. This 6-engine bomber, designed in the late 50s by North American Aviation, was capable of cruising at literally thousands of miles at Mach 3+, while flying at a cool 70,000 feet. The theory was that at such incredible speeds, the Valkyrie would be basically immune to the only effective weapon against bombers at the time, interceptor aircraft. But the introduction of the first Soviet surface-to-air missiles put the near-indestructibility of these bombers into serious doubt. In time, the United States Air Force Strategic Air Command gave up on the production, and the B-70 program came to swift cancellation in 1961. Development instead turned to a research program dedicated to studying the effects of long-duration high-speed flights. As part of this, 2 prototype aircraft, the XB-70, was constructed. The XB-70's brief operational history began with a maiden flight on September 21, 1964. During this test flight, one engine had to be deactivated mere minutes after takeoff, and an undercarriage malfunction warning meant that the flight had to continue with the undercarriage hanging down for safety's sake. Not a great start. This also meant the plane was limited to a speed of 390 miles per hour, less than half of what was intended. It was during its 3rd test flight that it finally became supersonic. But despite being the biggest and fastest bomber ever built by the United States, this massive 6-engine jet never entered production. One lone prototype is collecting dust in a museum. This is all because in 1966, tragedy struck. One of the 2 prototypes, during its own test flight, had a mid-air collision with its F-104N chase plane. The impact was devastating. 2 pilots sadly lost their lives, and many more were injured. This second prototype was significantly more capable than the first, and its loss was a major setback for the entire program. Lacking the funding to rebuild, especially considering the circumstances under which it had been lost, the Air Force continued to try and push the program with only the 1 prototype until February 4, 1969. But sadly, the XB-70's reputation had been tarnished and it was too difficult to move forward with the one lone craft. The project crumbled and that one lone bomber now sits in a museum. To think, what could have been? But it wasn't just the United States and Russia that has bombers in the air. The Shan H-6, a license-built variation of the Soviet Tupolev Tu-16 twin-engine strategic heavy jet bomber, was built for China's People's Liberation Army Air Force. In recent times, the Shan H-6's bombers have landed on Woody Island in the disputed Paracel Islands as part of China's continued militarization of disputed territory in the South China Sea. The H-6 is a heavily upgraded copy of the rather antiquated 1950s Soviet-era bomber the Badger. The Chinese remix of the Badger improves and replaces almost everything, turning this antique into a far more modern aircraft. Unlike other iterations of the Badger, the H-6 was designed mostly to be a cruise missile carrier and is capable of carrying up to 6 YJ-12 or CJ-10L long-range land attack anti-ship cruise missiles attached to the wings, along with the potential to carry many more inside its weapons bays. While it is not known for sure, it is also suspected that the H-6 carries a host of precision-guided weapons, making it a threat to not only U.S. ships but land bases as well. The fact that it carries YJ-12 missiles is a cause for concern for America. These missiles are considered the most dangerous to have been produced by China so far, with a range of 248 miles, making it one of the longest-range air-to-air missiles of its kind. This, combined with its incredible speed, makes it tricky for Aegis combat systems and the SM-2 surface-to-air missiles that protect U.S. carrier strike groups to identify and engage the YJ-12, should one be launched in their direction. Now that you've seen some of the biggest bombers in the world, what do you think the future has in store? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked the video, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, and you'll be the first to know when a new video arrives. Thanks for watching.